Okay, so maybe you're thinking about reading Eragon. That's the first book, right? In Christopher Paolini's Inheritance Cycle.
Yeah, that's the one.
So you've seen it around, obviously, maybe read some reviews,
Mm-hmm.
but are kind of on the fence about whether to actually pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're going to try to figure out for you.
Yeah.
In the next, 9 minutes,
Yeah.
should you read Eragon or not?
Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, if fantasy and adventure are your thing, especially if you, grew up loving Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, you'd probably really enjoy Eragon.
But, I mean, isn't it just like Star Wars but with dragons instead? That's what I've heard, anyway.
Yeah, that's a pretty common criticism, actually.
Yeah.
And honestly, Paolini's not exactly subtle about his influences.
Right.
You see a lot of Luke Skywalker in Eragon, right? You know, the whole farm boy stumbles on a destiny you never even imagined thing.
Oh, totally.
And then you've got Brahm, his mentor. Total Obi-Wan Kenobi vibes, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But here's the thing. The book's got a lot of heart, too. This big, sweeping sense of adventure. And the magic system, super unique. So yeah, are there familiar elements? Sure. But it still stands on its own, especially, I think, for younger readers.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about the writing itself? I mean, some of the reviews I've seen haven't been that great.
Yeah, so Paolini was super young when he wrote this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, only 15.
Wow, okay.
And it shows sometimes. He definitely overuses the word said.
Oh, yeah?
And some of the descriptions could use some trimming, for sure.
Too much detail.
Yeah, some reviewers even compared it to, bad fan fiction.
Ouch.
But here's the thing, though. The writing actually gets a lot better throughout the series. In the later books, you really see how much Paolini's grown as a writer.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, his descriptions get way more vivid and evocative.
Okay.
And the dialogue just flows better. It's more natural.
So, like a diamond in the rough, then?
Basically. Yeah. And there's this earnestness to it,
Yeah.
you know? You can tell how passionate Paolini was about this world.
Mm-hmm.
And that energy, it's kind of infectious, actually.
Right, I get that.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lack of polish is more than made up for by the passion behind it.
Totally.
So, I want to talk about the world itself. Alagaësia, is that right?
Yep, that's it.
What makes it stand out from other fantasy settings?
Well, for one thing, it's really diverse. You've got these huge mountain ranges, dense forests, sprawling deserts, even volcanic regions.
Wow, okay, variety.
Yeah, and each of those areas, they're all home to totally unique creatures and cultures. You've got your classic elves, obviously.
Elegant and magical.
Right. But then you've also got the Urkels. They're these brutal, warlike creatures that play a big part in the conflict.
Okay, interesting.
And then there are the Razaks. They're creepy.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Bird-like creatures that serve the evil king Galbatorix.
Huh?
They're honestly terrifying, unlike anything I've ever seen in other fantasy books.
That actually sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I'm kind of getting Lord of the Rings vibes now, with all these different races and creatures and stuff.
Yeah, there are some definite similarities there, especially in the scope of the story. And the whole world at war thing. You've got the Varden, who are this rebel group fighting against Galbatorix.
Okay.
And they're kind of like the Fellowship of the Ring in a way.
Right, going on this dangerous quest to overthrow a tyrant.
Exactly.
So what about the magic system? How does it work? Is it just the same old magic we've seen a million times before?
This is actually where Eragon really stands out. The magic system's based on this ancient language.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's super intricate and well-developed. To do magic, you actually have to speak these words of power.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there are all these rules and limitations. You can't just create something out of nothing.
Great.
You can only manipulate the energy that's already there. And if you use too much magic, there can be some serious consequences.
Like what?
Even death. So it makes things really challenging for Eragon as he's learning to control his powers.
Yeah, I bet.
It's not just like waving a wand and poof, things happen. There's a lot of strategy involved.
So it's more about precision and understanding the magic rather than just raw power.
Exactly. And it makes the story more realistic, I think.
I can see that.
It's not just about flashy spells. It's about understanding how magic actually works.
That's a nice change of pace, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of Eragon, is he just your typical perfect fantasy hero?
He's definitely got those classic hero traits,
Like what?
Brave, compassionate, driven by a sense of justice.
Okay.
But he's also flawed,
Right.
Makes mistakes.
Right.
And that's one of the things that makes him relatable, I think.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I have heard some people complain that he's kind of Mary Sue.
Uh-huh.
You know, like too perfect and good at everything.
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from, for sure. He does seem to pick things up pretty quickly,
Yeah.
especially sword fighting and magic.
Yeah.
But he's also incredibly dedicated and driven.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's got some incredible teachers,
Sure.
like Brahm and Saphira.
Oh, yeah. Saphira. I want to talk about her.
The dragon in the room.
Exactly. I mean, she's got to be a fan favorite, right?
Oh, for sure.
So what makes her so special?
Saphira is definitely one of the most compelling characters in the book.
Mm.
Honestly, their bond is like a major part of the story, you know, that connection between them. And Paolini does such a good job of showing how it grows and changes. It's heartwarming, it's intense, it's even funny sometimes.
Yeah, I do love a good dragon companion, gotta admit.
Right.
But, I mean, isn't that a bit of a cliche? You know, the hero and his trusty dragon sidekick.
I mean, sure, it's a classic fantasy trope, but Paolini finds a way to make it feel fresh. Saphira is not just like a pet or a way to get around. She's Eragon's partner, his confidant. In a lot of ways, she's even his teacher. She pushes him to grow, to see the world differently, and plus she can breathe fire and fly.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Always a bonus. Okay, so likable hero, awesome dragon, unique magic system. What about the story itself? Is it all just epic battles and, you know, flying around on dragons? Or is there more to it than that?
Well, there's definitely a ton of action and adventure, but the story also deals with some pretty heavy stuff, like loss, sacrifice, the weight of responsibility. Eragon goes through a lot, you know.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
His home gets destroyed, his uncle dies, he's constantly running from Galbatorix's forces. It's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I bet.
So he's dealing with grief, fear, and the knowledge that the fate of, like, the entire world is resting on his shoulders.
So not exactly a lighthearted romp through a magical world, then.
Not always, no. There's some really dark and emotional moments, and Eragon has to make some really difficult choices. Choices that have some serious consequences.
It's like a coming-of-age story, but with way higher stakes than most teenagers have to deal with.
Exactly.
So it sounds like Eragon has a little something for everyone. But what about the people who are still hesitant? Who do you think should maybe skip this one?
I think if you're the kind of reader who's looking for something super groundbreaking and experimental in fantasy, Eragon might not be for you. And if you're someone who's really sensitive to writing that's a bit, you know, rough around the edges, especially in those early chapters,
Yeah.
then you might want to try some other fantasy authors like Robin Hobb or Brandon Sanderson. Their writing is a little more polished, maybe.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I always appreciate knowing what I'm getting into before I start a new book.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask about the movie. I remember seeing it years ago.
Yeah.
And honestly, not impressed.
Yeah, the movie, it didn't really capture the magic of the book, let's just say that.
That happened.
It felt really rushed. A lot of important plot points were either condensed or left out entirely. They combined characters, simplified their motivations. It just didn't have the same depth as the book.
So if someone's interested in the story, you'd recommend sticking to the book.
Definitely. You get a much richer experience from the book. It's one of those adaptations that just couldn't do the source material justice. And actually, the movie did so badly that they canceled the sequels.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
That's a shame. It happens sometimes, I guess.
It does.
Okay, so we've talked about the good, the bad, the movie that probably should have stayed in development.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, was there anything else that stood out to you in the reviews? Anything we haven't covered yet?
You know what I found really interesting? The way Eragon seems to have impacted younger readers.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of reviewers talked about how it was their first fantasy book, the book that got them hooked on reading.
Gateway drug.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even the people who didn't love the story, they still admitted that it had this power to capture the imagination.
I love that.
Yeah.
It just goes to show, right, that a book doesn't have to be perfect to have a real impact.
Absolutely. And, you know, one reviewer mentioned something that really caught my attention. They were talking about this prophecy that Angela the Witch makes about Eragon's future.
Angela the Witch. Ringing a bell, but I can't quite place her. Remind me who she is again.
She's this really mysterious and powerful witch that Eragon and Brahm meet early on in their journey, and she loves to speak in riddles and prophecies.
Oh, right. Now I remember. Kind of creepy, but cool at the same time.
Exactly. And her prophecy for Eragon is one of those things you just can't forget. It hints at this much bigger story, you know, this destiny that Eragon doesn't even fully understand yet.
So it's like a seed planted in this first book.
Yeah.
And it grows into something much larger later in the series.
Exactly. And it makes you want to keep reading to see how it all plays out.
Okay, well, you've definitely convinced me to give Eragon another shot, but for anyone who's still not sure, what's the final verdict? Should they read it or what?
Okay, so the final verdict. If you're looking for like a fast-paced adventure, classic fantasy, with a hero you can root for, and a really cool dragon, then yeah, I'd say Eragon is worth checking out, especially if you're new to fantasy, or just want something fun to read, something to escape with.
But if you've read a ton of fantasy already, and you want something, like, really different.
Yeah, or if writing that's a little rough bothers you,
Right.
then maybe skip this one.
And definitely skip the movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it sounds like Eragon is kind of a mixed bag.
Then, I mean, yeah. It's not perfect, but it's a fun read.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that Paolini really cared about this world. And who knows, maybe it'll even get some people hooked on fantasy.
Yeah, maybe. So we'll leave you with this. One reviewer mentioned this prophecy Angela the Witch makes about Eragon's future. And it's full of all these cryptic details
Oh, yeah.
about future battles, impossible choices, a destiny that goes way beyond Alagaësia. It makes you wonder, right? What challenges will Eragon have to face? What's going to happen to him? What's his destiny? Guess you'll have to read the rest of the series to find out.
Exactly.
Well, that's it for our deep dive on Eragon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.